Welcome back to Propology 101. We're going to be finishing up our DL-44 discussion with the Return of the Jedi DL-44. Now, there's actually 4 versions of this blaster. 3 of them we're going to talk about, and 1 of them we're not going to talk about at all. And the reason why is it's a weird blaster, and it's only shows up in deleted scenes, so it was never even screen used. So we're not even going to talk about it. Might show you a picture of it, but we're not going to talk about it. Anyway, the Return of the Jedi DL-44 very much resembles the Empire Strikes Back DL-44. Greebly placement, scope mount, all that stuff. It's definitely, they took a stunt and said, remake this for Return of the Jedi. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Now, there was 1 blank firing. Actually, technically 2 blank firing, but we're not going to talk about one of the blank firings. There was 1 blank firing that we're going to talk about and 2 model gun corporations. Now, the 2 model gun corporations, they're practically identical. A matter of fact, I believe they show up on screen at the same time. Now, there are some cool things that were done to them. Something we have not seen on any of the other DL-44s. And what that is right here on the left side of the blaster, they actually did some machining work. Instead of putting the motor coil cover on the left side, they actually just took an end mill and plunged it twice to make 2 little circles in that raised square area. They also took that same end mill, plunged it, and then took a smaller end mill, plunged it, and then moved it left and right to make an elongated hole with a larger hole at each end. And that might have been to reproduce the fact that there were 2 Greeblies there on the ESB stunt version. Also, same thing with the motor coil cover. Maybe the prop maker that went into here says, I don't know what went here. Since we own these Model Gun Corporation Mausers, I'm just going to go ahead and machine. And that's a good possibility that's what happened. Now, the blank firing, it doesn't have any of that tooling done to it because it obviously was not owned by production. Now, the scope mount is also very similar to the scope mount used on the Empire Strikes Back stunt DL-44. And it's definitely custom made. It was cut out and created for each blaster individually. And the reason why I know this is if you actually get a hold of pictures of all those blasters that exist, there's, I think, at least 1 of the Model Gun Corporation still exists. There's some production photos and whatnot, but they're all a little bit different. They're cut in the same shape, but their thicknesses are different. You can tell they didn't come from a standardized template. They are all just a little bit different. Now, the scope mount is attached to the blaster on the Model Gun Corporations using a flathead screw with a countersunk washer, a fairly thick countersunk washer. On the blank firing version, I'm not exactly sure how that's mounted together. I really don't know. It looks similar, but there's no definite screws or anything like that. But there is a very similar washer that's on the Model Gun Corporation versions. The washers are made of brass, and you can actually see the brass on screen. The scope is also a total custom scope. It's 3 major parts, really, is what it is. It's a cut down end of a scope where you look through, they've taken it and cut it down. They added a cup-like cap that goes on there, and then a greebly on the front. Now, all the blasters, the 3 we're talking about, all those scopes were scratch built. It doesn't appear that any of these scopes were mold or castings of another one. It appears that they were all individually scratch built because you can find differences in all 3 versions of it. One standout difference is the greebly on the front of the scope is brass in color on the blank firing DL-44. I don't know if maybe that greebly that's on the blank firing DL-44 was a found part and was cast and added to the other scopes, or if they had a bunch of those pieces and glued them and painted them black, but on the blank firing version that never got painted, or they removed the paint, but the part is definitely made of brass. The scope is held to the scope mount using basically the exact same scope ring that we would find on the Return of the Jedi DH-17, and they may have just had a good supply of those because in the Return of the Jedi production, It's a little bit different than the productions of all the other movies because a large amount of the filming, especially all the outside scenes, were shot in California. So they had to do everything here in the U.S. and not rely on BAPTI in England for all the support and things they rented over the years from them. They had to come up with all that in-house here in the U.S. That kind of has an effect on a bunch of other things too, other props and other blasters. As far as greeblies go, there are 3 piston halves from the Revell engine kit, part numbers 67 and 68. There's 2 on the left side and then 1 on the right side. And then there is a square greebly that is fairly consistent with the same square greeblies we saw on the Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi DH-17s. And as far as those greeblies go, that's it. Because on the left side, they did tooling to replace the other greeblies that were on the left side of the blaster. Now, the flash oppressor is kind of a lot like the scope and the scope mount. Every one of them's a little bit different. They were all made per blaster from what I can tell, from what it looks like. The one big difference I noticed is I believe the blank firing version was made of aluminum and the Model Gun Corporation versions was made of a toolable resin or Delrin or something like that. There are 8 little pips on the backside end of the flash suppressor, and even there, they're not even consistent. They're not consistent in length and width from one flash suppressor to the other. They're actually not even consistent in width on themselves. The difference of the pips, they're different sizes. So it kind of shows that they were machined, but they weren't machined using any set blueprint or whatever. They just, we'll cut 8 pips, and then you get down to the last few pips, you realize, well, we're going to have at least one really large one or a couple small ones. Moving forward, what looks like to be Nurling, actually, I don't believe is Nurling. And I'm going to take a quick second. Someone asked me the other day what Nurling is, and I use Nurling a lot. Nurling is a machined texture onto a piece of metal that allows you to have grip. This is a ratchet, and there's knurling all along the back of this ratchet to help me grip. That is done with a tool like this. This is for knurling. This actually, the 2 wheels in here create that crosshatch section that you would find on this ratchet. But that's actually not what's on the Return of the Jedi. You'll see the knurling on the Empire Strikes Back Bespin DL-44s, but I believe those were aluminum. And I think for whatever reason, I've never machined Delrin or some of the toolable resins. Well, I have machined resin, but I've never attempted to put knurling in them, and I don't know if it's possible to knurl those types of materials. On Empire Strikes Back, the Hoth DL-44s were definitely made of resin or Delrin, and they didn't have knurling. If you remember, the knurling was drawn on with a Sharpie. What actually I believe did the lines on the Return of the Jedi DL-44s is a slit saw. And that's what this is here, is a slit saw. And basically it's a process where the saw blade sits like this and the part is moved against it and rotated. And I think that's how that was done. It was probably done on a mill, which actually a lot of the other work on this would have had to been done on a mill also. Even these lines on these flash suppressors isn't consistent from one flash suppressor to the other. They're all a little bit different. The way they were tooled, they're just all slightly different. If you put them all down together, roughly they all look exactly the same, but then you really start to examine them and they're all a little bit different. And I think that concludes our quick breakdown of the Return of the Jedi DL-44.